Welcome to the FarrCast, bringing you insights into Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr, and it is 2024, if you can believe it or not. Had to write that on a check yesterday. 2024, had to date a couple of documents, 2024. It feels surreal, doesn't it? When you have to write it down for the first time. Lots about the market right now and the world feel a little surreal to me. I think it's entirely appropriate that it feels surreal. And I think it reminds us that we have to have faith in a whole bunch of things, like the wonderful things that make up the United States of America and the wonderful country we live in. You got to have faith, the abiding faith and the abiding goodness and wonder of this country. And then you have to have some faith in what's really going on the corporate side of our country, that indeed we expand and we grow and we provide good things and we innovate and we work hard in this country and we enjoy the fruits of our labors in this country. So there's lots of good things that are abiding and going on and growing and happen over time, year in and year out, in spite of how surreal it feels. Well, I'm hearing folks say, geez, market's going down. Well, that actually doesn't feel surreal, and it's not going down that much, by the way. You've got some of the leaders that went through the roof pulling back a little. They're not collapsing. They're not going through the floor. They're not, they're not imploding. They're pulling back a little. Things pull back a little. You try not to buy things at their all-time highs. There have been opportunities out there, folks, been good opportunities in a lot of different companies and a lot of different sectors, and they're starting to see some appreciation. And who knows whether this is going to be that big cycle back or not the big cycle back? Really doesn't matter for a long-term investor who's thinking about a retirement in 20 years or funding children's education or trying to leave a legacy or help some charities and non-for-profits. All of those folks are thinking about the long term, how we navigate and how we benefit from all of these strong, pretty wonderful cycles that we have the benefit of enjoying as Americans and have had for most of our lives. We bitch a lot, but basically we've got it pretty good, folks, and that don't think it's going to change. So hang in there. Have a little faith in yourselves and in this wonderful country, in each other. We're going to get through this. Jim Iuorio is the guy we go to when our faith is lagging ever, when we're saying, geez, can it keep going? What do we do now? Jim Iuorio, of course, the director, TJM Institutional Services, the voice of the Chicago floor of the exchange. Welcome back, Jim, and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Michael. I'm not certain, because you mentioned, and I agree with the things you said 100%, have faith in the corporate sector, have faith in America. And American exceptionalism exists when it's compared to everything else. We had Brent Johnson on our podcast, and he made the most wonderful case for if we are in a bad spot and everyone else is in a far worse spot. That being said, you didn't mention that we have faith in the government and the people who are the stewards of our fiat currency, the Federal Reserve and the government, because I don't have the greatest amount of faith in them. And I think that's a concern 24. Did I just start the first show of the year?
I was really trying to keep it on a good foot here, Iuorio. I really was. There was a reason I didn't mention it, because I am kind of disgusted with all of them. I mean,
I heard you not mention it.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of every speech I give, I have a slide that says, here are the reasons you don't lose faith in America. And one of them is that we've got a organized, peaceful government. And then I'll stop and I'll go, well, let's not say organized. Let's say we have a peaceful government. Well, okay, we've got a government. Next.
We have a government.
We definitely have a government. Let's move on. It's hard to figure out what's going on and how the venom in Washington has reached these levels, and how this continual push to the fringes of both parties is how you get elected. And as you talk to more centrist members of Congress, they will tell you, listen, Jim, if I don't vote for this thing that I don't like, they will primary me in my own district. What does that mean? It means that the Speaker of the House or the leader of the minority, whip, who trying to get votes, will find another candidate in your district, and they will fund that candidate's election. So if you're a Democrat, they'll find another Democrat who's further to the left than you are, and they'll fund that election so they have somebody who's going to do it their way, because this is how they get elected. It makes it very, very hard, particularly for young congressmen and women, to do well in Washington if they don't toe the line. They just squelch them out, and you've got no voice. So it's a bad state, huh?
Yeah, the way I always say it is that the characteristics that get you elected are the exact same characteristics that ensure that you can't be a good leader, because you have to sell your soul in the fringe primaries. And that particularly goes for the presidency. Imagine, like a John Kasich, and I don't know what you thought of him as a candidate a while back, but he sounded moderate to me. That's the way I classified him. And I was like, I like what you're saying, but also you can't win because you're not inflaming everybody's passions on the far side. So it really kind of bums me out.
Yeah, I think it bums out a lot of Americans. And for all the traveling and speaking I've done around the country, I've said this on the FarrCast before, not one person has said, oh boy, Trump, Biden, we can't go wrong. Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter what your flavor is. Trump, Biden, we can't go wrong. Seriously, out of 335 million people, these are the two best we've got. Come on.
There's 3 people on this call this morning, including the producer, who are far miles better candidates than any of those people.
I said for quite a while that I would probably have voted for my Labrador Retriever for president before many of the candidates I saw up there on the stage. Though there are a few up there on the stage right now, I would vote for. On both sides of the aisle. Competent, good people. Listen, they don't have to agree with everything I happen to think about politics in the world. I wish they did, because of course I think I'm right. I think I've got all of the answers. I really do. I think the world would be better off if they just listened to me all the time.
I agree with that. I'm not being funny. I think 100% true.
Yeah, but let's find people. Give me good enough. Give me a good, bright, reasonable person in there who will talk about America the way that John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan talked about America. There, both sides of the aisle. You like that, folks? Just let me hear that American ideal, and let me hear your determination and commitment to those American values that have let my generation be where it is, and what I think is the hope for our future. Jim, what's the hope for the market's future? People don't care what we think about politics.
Good point. Let's get right to the markets.
We've been doing markets for 30 and 40 years. Let's tell them about those. What do you think?
Okay, here's what I think. I think we had 9 straight weeks of higher highs in the S&P going up in the end of the year. To think that we have a pullback in the cards is completely reasonable. So this beginning pullback is probably position squaring people who maybe had window dressed in the last couple months of the year, trying to rebalancing and selling. Now the problem is that I do believe that selling can beget selling. There's a little bit of weakness. It kind of can filter into the normal, like, oh yeah, I was supposed to rebalance, and then some selling comes out. But I do think, more importantly, the biggest thing is that the Fed is going to probably be easing in 2024. That's the biggest catalyst for stock market going higher. Now, I do think the Fed is going to resist until the stock market kind of forces the issue. And the reason I say that is because historically, that's kind of what's happened. The stock market will all of a sudden break 10, 12%. And then the Fed will be like, okay, the case for easing, our timetable has been accelerated. And I do think they're going to ease in March. I do think it's reasonable to think there are going to be 4 or 5 easings. I think the labor market is not nearly as strong as it's been portrayed to us. And I could go into that fairly deeply if you want. It's not just off the back of my hand. But I think at that point in time, the stocks become a good buy, because I think there's a whole series of events that I think could happen. It involves issuance of the treasuries, going further out the curve, raising those rates by the sheer weight of the selling, and then the Fed coming back in and reinstituting quantitative easing, which in my opinion will hurt the dollar, will affect things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, real estate, commodities, and also stocks. Stocks like a weak dollar too. They like cheap cheaper money. And if the Fed comes in and weakens our dollar, I think that could help stocks by the end of the year. But I think the first part of the year could be difficult.
You think that the Fed will ease this year at some point?
I do. I think they'll ease relatively quickly. I think the numbers that have been coming out are absolute garbage. Even the GDP number is so largely fueled by excess government spending. The labor numbers, that birth death model is so terrible at predicting turns in the market. That's why almost every number has been revised lower. I think that the labor market, quit rates have just absolutely plummeted. And for those of you watching, that's one of the metrics I look at the economy that's most important. People don't quit their jobs unless they're really confident in the labor market or they've gotten other offers. If people aren't quitting as much, that means they're scared of the labor market. So I'm looking more to that than I am looking what the government's telling me about the jobs.
That's it's interesting. So when we heard one Fed governor yesterday, and I can't remember which one, and I read about it and actually talked about it. Now I can't remember his name. That's just being 62, folks. I got to tell you, that's sorry. But was saying that it was not out of the question there would be another Fed rate hike. Now maybe he was just jawboning out there because I don't think there will be. But it set a different tone. And Polcari is writing this morning when you read the notes also from yesterday that end of year, by the end of the year, not by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year is what they said in the minutes. Seems like something later in the year as the Fed tries to stay higher for longer and hold the ground. They always do things for too long, don't they, Jim?
That's the problem with the Fed and the people who are like, and the Fed. I used to think they had no leg to stand on. Now I do think there's some validity to that argument because they always keep rates too low for too long. They did it in 2020, June of 2021. CPI is already printing above 5%. They said it was transitory, and they put the pedal to the metal and kept buying bonds. Do I think they're going to keep it too high for too long? Yes. I don't even think the efficacy of the Fed rate hikes has been fully felt because of what we've been talking about forever, and that's the duration roll that happened before the hiking cycle, meaning everybody rolled into long-term loans. Not everybody, obviously, but a great majority of the people can sit back and look at these higher interest rates and say, wow, it sucks to be you if you're borrowing now, but I'm fine because I have a 30-year mortgage at 2.5%. So I don't think
I'm not going anywhere because I got my 30-year mortgage at 2.5%.
Anywhere. So I think that the disinflation that we've seen was supply chains healing, and we haven't even felt the poke of higher rates yet. And as we begin to, I think it could be economically detrimental.
So somewhere in here, you and I will agree. I think it's probably later than you think it. Well, you know what, Jim? You said you thought it should be sooner, but you didn't say you thought it would be sooner. You and I might not be too far apart on time, but in terms of should, but when it'll happen, I think it's going to be later. So, but if you're an investor and you've watched stock prices reach these heights and you have some money to commit and you want to think about things going forward, I've got just a couple more questions for you. I know I'm already over time, but I'm sorry. I got to get this out of you. So if I'm thinking about this and I've got a scenario where rates are going to come down, I'm talking to people about saying, well, maybe we think about things that we haven't been thinking about before. Maybe home builders, and people look at me and groan when I say home builders and they go, oh God, Farr, wait a minute. I'm not talking to you about this quarter. I'm saying if I buy something that's in the basement and everybody groans whenever I mention it, knowing that I've got rate cuts coming up, not a recommendation to buy or sell anything, folks. I'm just telling you how I formulate my investment opinions. Or I go to some of the, folks have been talking about energy stocks for the past quarter because they've been so out of favor. And don't we have to see an increase in energy prices at some point, given supply constraints and what's going on in the Middle East? I mean, all of these things. Where do you look, Jim? How do you think about it in anticipation of a changing economic landscape?
So you know that I've liked energy a lot over the last 2 years. This is an election year. I do think there's the possibility that they could continue to try to keep oil prices down going to the election, and energy might not do as well this year. You mentioned home builders. I like that a lot. There's been a structural supply problem with homes for years that needs to be rectified. I'm fine with that. Banks like a steeper yield curve. I think the yield curve is going to steepen, and they've been out of favor. The Russell to the big caps is one of the widest spreads it's ever been. They've done very, very poorly. If rates are coming down, a lot of those smaller companies are highly sensitive to that.
So which Russell, Jim, are you talking about?
Is it the Russell 2000, the one I trade the
Okay,
futures?
I'm sorry, the Russell Small Cap. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
small cap, right? Yeah, sorry. IW1 is the ETF, but I trade the futures on it. But I think that could do very well this year. Again, I've said gold and silver and Bitcoin quite a bit, and I still stick.
And then you see when I make my investments, I'm like that old Ron Popeil thing. I set it and forget it. I want to leave that there for the next few years. I'll watch it like a hawk. And it's hard keeping your discipline through a broader cycle that Jim would trade. So I'm going to there's a pharmaceutical company that I've been watching I don't want to talk about owned or not owned for the purposes of this particular broadcast, but pharmaceutical company you could have bought at the beginning of last year at $225 a share. That's almost doubled now, $425 a share. It pulled back to $375 a share. And when you watch that thing go up and you watch your investment get to, 420 and then pulls back to 375 and goes back to 420. When it's at 375, even though you bought it at 2.25, you're thinking, oh crap, here it's going to round trip. It's going to go back to 300. I should have sold it higher. I should have blah, blah, blah. And I would have paid a bunch of taxes, of course, if I'd sold it higher. And then I wouldn't own it. And now it's back at 425 again. And you think, so all I have to do is hold and close my eyes, right? Benign neglect. Jim, but you might have made more money trying to buy that and sell that going up and down.
Well, I had a pretty good year, but I will add something else because there's some portfolios I trade long term. And that when we've had a great year like we did last year, I do think we have a saying, bears can make money, bulls can make money, pigs get slaughtered. And what that means is if you looked in your risk tolerance suggested that you have the 60-40 portfolio and your stocks exploded. I'm not making recommendations to people. This is what I do. Then I have to sell something, particularly in tax deferred accounts, to get my risk tolerance to get my risk back to where I can tolerate it. And I don't think that's unreasonable to do at the beginning of the year. I personally think you should pick a random date, but be disciplined on that date to rebalance.
Yep. And you rebalance, I would also say, folks, it's important in conjunction with your financial advisor and say, are we doing the right thing? Has anything else changed in my life, in your life, and what's going on? Or, hey, I'm now I keep saying I'm 62. I'm going to be 63 in April. Do you plan to retire at 65? Well, I don't. But if I did, that might really change what my advisor would tell me about my allocation. All of this is great advice from our great friend, Jim Iuorio from TJM Institutional Services. Jim, we wish you and yours a happy, happy new year from everybody at the FarrCast. And we hope we'll see a lot more of you.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.
See you, Jim. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be right back.
Thanks for joining us this week on the FarrCast. Join us next week when Michael's special guest will be Tony Dwyer of Canaccord Genuity. But now, here's political analyst Matt Leffingwell and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I'm Michael Farr. It is January 2024, the first FarrCast of the year. Jim Iuorio did a great job for us. You know, when we talked about those things that we believe in and can kind of have faith in a more abiding way, expansion of the U.S. economy over time, that the United States model of government will prevail over time and come through good times and bad times, and that this way of life is just about as wonderful as you can imagine, particularly when compared to all the others around the world. Iuorio has to just, rain on the New Year's parade I'm trying to throw here and say, but you didn't mention our government, Michael. You didn't mention anything good about our government. Well, I would have if I'd had anything good to say about our government. I promise I would have, other than it seems to, we still have one. I guess that will continue. But the next two segments, folks, Matt Leffingwell, of course, has been with us many times before. And in segment 3, so has Les Munson. They're actually both here. So if Les, if you want to jump in. Matt Leffingwell is with Tiber Creek Group in Washington. He's a partner there. This is a lobbying firm in Washington, and he is an insider's insider, as is Les Munson at BGR Group. Lots of international stuff with Les. They both do a little bit of everything, but really, if you want to get the temperature for Capitol Hill, and I thought, what better time of the year to do that than right now? Lots going on. So we're going to start with Matt Leffingwell. Matt, tell me, just address your thoughts about what's going on in Washington, and why do so many Americans feel like Jim Iuorio and feel like I feel with this sort of, geez, what's happened to Washington? Why does it stink so badly? And can we ever get it back to some place we all might admire again?
Yeah, sure. Well, good to see you, Michael, and Happy New Year. First off, I think the root of the problem is the slim majority in the House. That has been generating problems for the Congress, and since it was sworn in. Right now, they're facing a uphill climb to come to an agreement on a border security package. They negotiated the Senate, a bipartisan group of senators negotiated all through the holidays. The speaker led a delegation of around 60 House members down to the border yesterday. That seems to be on top of everybody's mind, in addition to government funding, which the first tranche of funding, which expires on January 19th. The second tranche, about 80% of federal spending, expires on February 2nd. It seems to all be coming to a head again. This sort of end game scenario typically comes to an end right before Christmas, with the Christmas deadline being inspiration for things to come together. That was kicked down. That typical deadline was kicked down the road, and so this is going to be a high drama month until government funding, border, Ukraine, Israel sorted out.
Was this a good move by Mike Johnson? When I heard that he was taking these folks down here as Speaker of their House, I was like, politically, that sounds like pretty brilliant. I mean, brings a big focus and spotlight. There's the Speaker showing some real leadership, not just bickering and addressing an issue that majority of Americans care about. I'm not being partisan, folks. Majority of Americans care about that southern border and the immigration and the 10,000 people a day coming across.
Yep.
You think it's a good move? And what does it accomplish a little bit longer term? Is it just with the voting public, or did he get any traction on Capitol Hill with that?
I think the House Republicans coalescing around border security is a smart political decision for them. I mean, this is something that is already fracturing the Democrats. You have, more moderate Democrats and perhaps Republican districts who are getting beaten up over the issue. It goes much farther beyond just being a Republican issue, but it's easy to coalesce around it and attack the administration politically and really differentiate themselves from the Democrats. And the House Republicans really need this kind of cohesion going into an election year. So I do think it was a really good move on the part of the Speaker, and it just increases pressure for the House and Senate to come up with some sort of deal that they can pass in both chambers. I don't think the Republicans' position of only going with HR 2, which was the House Republicans' initial border security package, would ever pass the Senate per se. But there's got to be some middle road that they come to.
Okay, so Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes?
Yep.
Okay. I just don't want to make sure that somebody else hadn't taken a slot since last I read the New York Times. So Hakeem Jeffries, why wouldn't it be a good idea for Hakeem Jeffries to take a group of Democrats down to the border and do the same thing right now? Why?
He's balancing his progressives, and he does have a sizable chunk of progressives in his caucus. I think that's what Democrats you don't
have to go with a foregone conclusion. You can go down for an exploratory. You can do say we're there, we're watching, we're there for humanitarian concerns. We're there for whatever the hell you say you're there for, but at least they get their minute in front of the camera, right?
Yeah, but
we're worried about this too.
I think Hakeem Jeffries is happy to keep that hot potato in the administration's hands for right now. And I think that may be seen as some sort of undermining of the administration's position if he goes down there and brings more attention to it.
Vice President Harris went down and it almost backfired.
Correct. Yeah.
Her time there, and as with a lot of things with the vice president, seemed to me more her handling of that than it was the trip itself. But so we're now hearing that for this 2024 election, Donald Trump's the lock for the Republicans. Nobody else has a chance. Nobody else has had this kind of a lead before and ever not gotten the nomination. He thinks he can have it wrapped up by March. He thinks he's got it wrapped up by March. So number one, do you agree with that? And then George Will says that Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee for president. He doesn't say 50-50. I mean, he said won't be, at least 50-50 won't be. What do you think about both of those comments?
I think right now it feels as though Donald Trump pretty much has the nomination locked up, and I think he has a very good shot at becoming president unless the Biden administration does something to address the border situation. I think that is going to be the overriding issue going into the elections. And, in terms of there being a different Democrat nominee at the top of the ticket, I think the Democrats are just running out of time. I would say they have 1 or 2 months before, if they're going to make a drastic move like that, which I don't see them doing. I don't agree with George Will on that, even though he and I get our haircut at the same spot. I do think they stick with Biden, and I think it's a major mistake. But if there is some radical move on the Democrats' part to make a change, I think they have 1 or 2 months to do that before they're just out of time.
And okay, if that were to happen, what would be necessary? What are the steps to make that happen? Because there's been no indication from Joe Biden at all that he's willing to say, I'm going to step down. I mean, zero indication that he's willing to do that.
And
so
he would have to be the one to lead that effort. Absolutely. They're not just going to oust him. And I don't even think that's possible. So, he would have to be the one to voluntarily step down.
Why is George Will saying that then? George Will's the awfully smart guy.
He is an awfully smart guy, but I think he's saying it because that would be the most practical thing for Democrats to do at this point. I mean, that's why he's saying it. And maybe it's a situation where it's the tail wags the dog. He thinks that that's going to be the more and more pundits, echoing that will perhaps push things into action. But I really just don't see it happening.
Okay. All right. Don't see it happening. He doesn't see it. It doesn't see it happening. So therefore, we've got Trump Biden again.
Yeah. Is everybody excited?
Yeah. I said when I was talking to Iuorio, all the places I travel around the country and all the people I talk to, and they hear from I'm from Washington all my life, and they want to talk about politics. Not one person in the country on either side of the aisle has said, Trump Biden, great. You can't go wrong, can you? Not one. One thinks Trump Biden is the way to go. Okay, so tell me, in this election year coming up that looks like a Trump Biden year, what happens in Washington? What happens with Mike Johnson? What can he get done? And what happens when this funding comes due again and everybody starts wetting their pants on Capitol Hill about this won't happen and everybody's going to get shut down and Social Security recipients aren't going to get their checks and, they're going to be wailing and gnashing and crying in the streets. I mean, that never seems to really get there. But what are they doing, Matt?
Yeah, I really don't believe there's going to be a shutdown. I think even with the loud right flank of the House Republican Conference who want to shut down, they like shutdown politics. I think the adults in the room know that, and both sides of the aisle know that a shutdown is bad, and the biggest losers in that scenario would be House Republicans, especially when you have Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats largely on the same page when it comes to spending this year. But I don't think there's going to be a shutdown. I think after this next month of sorting out the end year FY24 funding, I don't think you're going to see much of anything get done. I think you'll see the legislative wheels grind to a halt, July, September, they're going to have, inevitably have to pass another, short-term stopgap measure to keep government funding going, and past the election. And then in October, it's going to be dead. They'll be in recess with everybody at home campaigning and the presidential election going on. And then you'll go into a lame duck Congress, presumably after that. Where they'll just dump a bunch of crap on the floor and try to get it passed. That's what the year will look like.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we got another nothing year coming out of Congress. No reason to get your hopes up, folks. No reason to get your hopes up that anything's going to change.
You thought last year was tumultuous. Yeah.
Not going to change. SOS.
SOS. Right. Yeah.
Same old. Okay. So 2 questions, Matt.
Yep.
2 questions. Will Mike Johnson be the Speaker of the House January 1, 2025?
Right now, my prediction says no. I think that the House Republicans have, forced their vulnerables to take a lot of really tough, bad votes. I think the leadership challenges were all, led to even more bad votes, such as voting for, Jim Jordan. So I see a very uphill climb for the House Republicans to be able to keep the majority. And the Senate, I think you could see this very unusual split where the Republicans could take the majority in the Senate, just given that there are, I think, 23 Democrat seats up that are just a lot in like vulnerable states like, Montana and West Virginia. So you could see the Senate flip. And then in the House, I could see it flip the other way for the Dems. Finally,
who will the president-elect be January 1, a year from now?
It's been, right now it certainly feels like it'll be Donald Trump. Got a lot of wind in his back.
A lot of wind in his back. I know we're going to have some FarrCasts coming up later this year where we talk with folks like Matt Leffingwell, Les Munson, and others to really try and say, what does another Trump presidency look like after he's learned everything that he learned in the first term since he's been in office, and who will he appoint to his cabinet? And what will his agenda be? And will he be more efficient in pursuing and achieving his agenda items than ever before? It sounds like we have a Republican Senate. We might keep a Republican House. If he has both parties, what does he get done then?
Right. Yeah.
Stay tuned to the FarrCast, folks, because we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. You've heard us talk to Jim Iuorio. You've heard us talk to Leffingwell now. We figured out Washington. We're going to Munson when we come back next. Matt Leffingwell is a partner at Tiber Creek, our great friend on the FarrCast. Happy New Year, Matt. Thanks so much for being with us.
Happy New Year.
Please stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be right back with the great, the powerful, the all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent Lester Munson when we come back on the FarrCast. Just don't pull the curtain back.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr.
We appreciate you listening into the FarrCast this week. And now to introduce this week's special guest, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast, where we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Joining us for the world and his insights and opinion, Lester Munson from the BGR Group. It is a lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. He has great experience on Capitol Hill, White House, everywhere else. He's one of those guys who just gets things done for people in Washington. Hey, Les, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the FarrCast.
Thanks, Michael. Happy New Year to you.
We're really glad to see you. Well, you listened to everything that Matt Leffingwell said. Tell me what you think about his highlight opinions of what's going on in Washington. Does Mike Johnson stay the speaker? What do you think about the election? Does anything get done? What happens with these funding things? And then we're going to move on to international very quickly. So I'm throwing those. Need your quick takes on all those.
Dangerous to disagree with Matt Leffingwell. He's pretty sharp, but I think House Republicans are in better shape than people think. Johnson's a pretty savvy speaker. He's done really well for the last couple months.
I thought this was a really good move to go to the border.
Yeah, he's smart, and he's unifying his conference, and he's not unnecessarily alienating the other side. Some stuff he has to do that, but he only does it when he absolutely has to. He's leaving the door open to the White House and the Democrats on a whole bunch of stuff. He's playing it really smart, low key, shows up in the right place at the right time. He's a modest figure. He's really impressed me. It's only been a couple months, too early to draw a lot of conclusions, but so far, A+ for Mike Johnson.
Could he have navigated, do you think? I mean, I agree with you. I've been very impressed with what I've seen. The way this guy's handled this, from being a no-name, right? From being a no-name to taking the stage and actually showing some real leadership. Do you think he would have had a better run of it than Kevin McCarthy did? Would he have avoided any of the pitfalls that McCarthy seemed to plunge into?
Well, I think McCarthy's real problems were personal issues he had with other members of the conference that weren't going to go away. And that just had built up over a couple of decades. Some of them were evident a decade ago when he almost became speaker then.
See, folks, this is why you listen to the FarrCast, because you're not going to hear that anywhere else. Les Munson spent time on Capitol Hill. So why'd McCarthy really screw it up? Because he really pissed off a lot of people, and they pissed him off, and they were fighting, and he couldn't, with those personal relationships, get them to cross over and shake his hand. This guy, Mike Johnson, hadn't pissed off enough people. Maybe this is like joining a club before, getting voted into a club before too many people know you. Right? You got a blank slate is really valuable. And I guess in Washington too, huh?
Yeah. And Johnson, if anything, was kind of a hard right conservative as a backbencher and a minor leadership guy. He was on the far right. He's really moved to the center as speaker, which is a difficult thing to do. He did it, and no one really complained about it. That's something that there should be a news story on that. And I don't think anyone's really written it yet. Is the
backstory there? Look, folks, I have a new job, and this is what I have to do to get this job done for you and for the rest of this country. That's what I would say if I were Mike Johnson. Is that what he's saying? That's
been the veneer he's put on top of it. But in reality, everyone thought Kevin McCarthy was in trouble for cutting deals with Democrats. Not really true. It was a lot of personal animus built up over a long time with a select number of people. Johnson comes in and says, I will be different, but basically leaves the door open to having compromises with Democrats. This border deal, which could unlock really important aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, is because Mike Johnson is in the job and has left the door open to that possibility. And to President Biden's credit, he's played along with that. Now, they're not negotiating directly. The real action's in the Senate. But once that negotiation is done, and it may be very close right now because the senators are going to start coming back over the next few days, Johnson and Biden will have to take that deal and sell it to their constituencies. And Johnson's really left the door open to that. And so I'm not 100% sure he can actually do it, but it's kind of teed up for it to be possible.
And it's possible. Well, that's more optimistic, I think, than we've been in the past 6 months over things getting done at this critical juncture of funding deadlines and things that seem just dismal and DOA before they started. So this is good. This is good, folks. This is good. A little optimism from Les Munson. I want to. Well, okay. Will Johnson still be the speaker in January?
I think he will be, and I think he'll be strengthened. I think he'll have 10 or 15 more votes than he does now.
Strengthened,
I think a lot of,
and then the Senate goes Republican.
I'm less sure about the Senate. I think the Senate's basically going to be 50-50. I think the Republicans will pick up West Virginia and maybe Michigan, but probably not Montana or Ohio.
Yep.
And I think President Biden's going to get reelected. I think he's actually playing a really savvy game here. He's letting Donald Trump run away with this nomination, unless Nikki Haley can pull a magic act.
Yeah.
He's letting these legal problems and ballot challenges go straight at Trump, which strengthens him in the primary, but weakens him in the general. And I expect Biden to unleash hell, shock and awe campaign once Trump is actually the nominee to take his numbers way down. Now, that's all relative. There's not a lot of undecideds out there, but Biden is actually structurally in a pretty good position politically to get reelected. His only real problem
Who's the president-elect
age.
in a year, Les? Who's the president-elect in a year? I like what
Joe
you're saying.
Biden.
I mean, this is really fascinating because, we're not hearing this anywhere else, folks. So the Biden campaign, I get this. He's lying in wait. He's going to let it happen. He's geared up to go. And it really, everything about that sounds politically astute, except that it's being executed by a frail octogenarian.
It's really the only flaw in my argument, Michael.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, every time Joe Biden stands up and gives a speech for 8 minutes and doesn't make a mistake, you're like, oh, that was pretty good. So he's lowered expectations, that is a high quality value in politics.
He didn't drool. I saw that. He didn't drool. Good for you, Joe. Who's president in January, Les?
Joe Biden. Joe Biden gets a second term. I don't think he's going to do the whole term, but he'll get a second term.
Wow. Okay. We'll see. Now, I'm going to shift. We've got international affairs. So we've talked about the possibility of getting these funding bills through. We see we've got an issue at the border that has to be resolved, it seems, before we get funding solved. And the whole time we've got Zelensky over there going, would you all please get this done? Because I need some more money or I'm going to be learning Russian. And now we have an attack in Iran, killing 100 people in Iran, saying, holding Israel and the United States responsible, and nothing about that attack looked like anything Israel has ever done, certainly not the United States. We don't do things that way, folks. We will tell you when we're going to come and kick your ass. We will pre-announce it. We will tell you, and it's going to be some sort of commensurate response to something or other. We don't do random strikes. If we had done it, we would have told you. And if we were going to go do something over in that area, wouldn't we just wipe out the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea and actually restore some commerce and do some good for ourselves? We're not going to go in and just swat the hornet's nest for no stupid reason.
Yeah, that was almost certainly internal Iranian resistance. I mean, I don't know for sure, but as you point out, there's no interest in Israel or the United States pulling off something like this, Michael. This is probably something internal to Iran. I presume we are not involved. But it shows that, the Middle East, every time you think you've kind of gotten it figured out, there's some new crazy wrinkle that turns it all upside down. And if the regime in Tehran really is that much at risk, it does kind of explain why they're being so aggressive internationally, because it helps them crack down domestically. So it's good internal politics in a way for the mullahs in Iran, because they do have...
Yeah, that's interesting. Helps them crack down domestically. Okay. For those that would like to have reason, an excuse to expand the conflict, the war, why do they? This is really driven by religious principles and long inbred sort of hate of the other guy, I guess, that says we need to. I mean, war. I don't understand anybody who ever wants to choose war, particularly if it's in your own damn backyard. This is thousands of people who are going to die you're picking a war with the United States. You're going to bring it to the United States? I don't think so.
Well, there's Persia is a long-standing civilization. It goes back thousands of years. It's arguably the oldest, continually existing civilization on Earth. Very proud heritage, a lot of history there. And there's to just ascribe it to kind of religious extremism, I think isn't fair, although that is obviously part of it. There's the rivalry with Arab countries. There's the struggle for leadership with Turkey in the region and Saudi Arabia and Israel. All of those countries like to use Israel as a foil, although less so Saudi Arabia now. But Iran has been, not a leader in the world for a very long time. They feel snubbed. They want to get back to what they see as their rightful place in the leadership of the world, arguably. So some of this is kind of instinctive civilizational stuff. At the same time, they've got a leadership there that is old, is unelected. Their ties to the street in Iran are not very good. There've been protests in Iran going back for years. Just a couple of years ago, there were protests in almost every city in Iran. So that regime is trying to stay in power. They're going to use these instincts of the Iranian people to their advantage. And as long as the Iranian people, won't call them on it, it might work. If they start to call them on it, then maybe we'll see a change there.
Okay. All right. So a year from now, do we still have this war going on between Israel and Palestine and Hamas, or has Israel done sufficient damage to Hamas that they're done? And I don't know what the hell happens in Palestine after they would say they were done.
Israel is saying something like 3 or 4 months. I think they're overstating it. I think it's going to be more like 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to start to look very different. The real question is who's going to be running Gaza once the large force of Israelis exit the region. No one really has an answer for this. If there's a Israeli or U.S. approved Palestinian who's appointed to take care of Gaza, that won't work. So could there be an Arab coalition that puts forward someone who could be, kind of the head of a Gaza administration?
Yeah.
Possibly, but no one's really kind of articulated what that would look like yet.
So you think that Israel could basically have wiped out the significant portion of Hamas over the next 4 weeks?
I think that's very likely.
That's very likely. So in the greater scheme of things, I guess what I've just learned as the, American interested in politics who pays attention to world events is every time that, it seems to me that Israel has been threatened, Israel has confronted that situation with a hammer, told you what they were going to do, and then gone in and done it. Now, I also gave Israeli security and intelligence a lot more credit than actually was evidenced in this Hamas attack happening in Israel at all. I mean, Mossad, the scariest people on earth, and I mean, when it comes to international intelligence, how they miss this, I don't know. But with that exception, Israel has done what Israel said it was going to do. Hamas isn't any longer. So now we've left a vacuum in the heart of seat of terrorism. Typically vacuums are abhorred and you get more of what you had before. So that's what you're talking about. We have to avoid, right?
Well, that may be inevitable.
That we're just going to have a seat of terrorism there no matter what.
Or, the animus between Israelis and Palestinians is unlikely to go away in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And so I don't know that any political arrangement is necessarily going to change that. The question is, when can Israel kind of declare victory, pull back? And then the bigger political question, I think, for Netanyahu, when can he end the war cabinet and move to a internal political question of his government and his future? He's going to try to stay in power. Can he do that? He's survived really difficult situations before, although nothing like on this scale. His poll numbers are extremely low. So who replaces him, and how are they going, and how's that person going to govern Israel and deal with the Palestinians? We could be looking at that question in about 3 or 4 months.
In 2008, I went to Israel with Dr. Jeffrey Lacker, who was then president of the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank. It was November, late in 2008, in the middle of the financial crisis here. Dr. Lacker and I were giving speeches at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and we met with the Supreme Court. We met with some folks from their intelligence service. And we also went to Palestine, into Bethlehem, which is in Palestine. And that was really shocking. I'd never been to Israel. I'd never been to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, never seen any. Fascinating trip. One of my favorite trips I've ever taken, ever. And what I hadn't appreciated before was, at that time, the average per capita GDP in Israel was around $13,500 a year. And in Palestine, it was like $1,300 a year. Desperate, abject poverty in Palestine. And when you have that kind of abject poverty, there's the value for human life drops. Nobody has any great reason to want to stay alive or say, isn't life precious? They don't think life is precious. They don't have air conditioning. They don't have Domino's. They don't have cable TV. They don't have an iPhone. They don't have jack. These people are desperately poor, trying to survive, and having an extra couple of years of desperate poverty isn't all that attractive. So suicide bombers and everything else, it makes more sense when you can see it in that kind of a context. So this area of Palestine, well beyond this somewhat neutral zone that surrounds Bethlehem, still is governed by a collapsed economy that isn't going anywhere. There's no economic engine. And so my solution, and from as the economic guy, is to say, you've got to find something that's going to make you people some money over there. We learned that in Northern Ireland, right? We had poverty in Ireland for years, and we took tech into Ireland. We made business-friendly communities, and all of a sudden, everybody had a pretty good quality of life, and they said, maybe we should quit blowing each other up. I mean, it's not so bad. We suddenly have Domino's and cable TV and iPhones. This is life. It's not bad. So I'm looking for whatever part of that solution is, Les, it has to be economic. And there's got to be an economic plan if there's to be a successful political plan, says Farr.
Well, I don't know of one, Michael, that anyone's offering that makes sense. The international community, particularly the U.S., has spent a lot of money in Palestine on foreign assistance, and it really hasn't produced terrific results. Yep. There's been some good humanitarian aid, but the economic growth there has been dismal. If anything, the inequality is much greater now than when you saw it 15 years ago.
Yeah. Les, we always learn so much when you're on. Thank you so much for being with us. Happy New Year to you and everybody at BGR and to your family.
Thanks, Michael. Great to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for another FarrCast, as we do cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world here at the beginning of January 2024. We're going to be with you all of 2024, if God willing and the creek don't rise, as we used to say in Tennessee. So that's it. Please share us on social media. We've had thousands of new listeners sign up. We're so grateful to you. Please share us, and please keep listening. Send us your notes. I love hearing from you. Are we addressing the things you want to hear? I hope so. These are the things I think about, and then I go find these experts. Harry helps find experts, and we want to help you be better informed week to week. Figure out when you go to that out on the golf course or go to that cocktail party, we hope by listening to the FarrCast, you're going to be a lot smarter than the next guy, right? At least I always get smarter by the third drink, but we're going to make you smarter by the first drink here on the FarrCast. That could be our goal for 2024, Harry. That's it, folks. See you next week. I'm so grateful to you. For Hightower Advisors, Farr, Miller, and Washington, my producer, Harry Jennings, I'm Michael Farr.
And that's a wrap for our first episode of 2024. Please join us each week as we continue Season 7. Thanks to our guests this week, Jim Iuorio, Matt Leffingwell, and special guest, Les Munson. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Google, Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. You can stream past episodes as well as subscribe so you never miss a new one. Please be aware that any time we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it's not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And, as always, if we can be of assistance at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. We are here to help, and I am happy to arrange for any of our listeners an appointment with one of our financial professionals to review your portfolio, your needs, and your goals. We love reading all of your notes and try to reply to as many as we can. You can reach us at hjennings@farrmiller.com. Let us know any questions you have about past episodes or things you'd like us to address in upcoming shows. Please subscribe and share the show, and we'll be back with you next week with regulars Jim Lebenthal, Dan Mahaffee, and our scheduled special guest, Tony Dwyer. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. Have a great new year, and thanks for listening to the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and a SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.